Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this latest in Exceedo's Customer Success webinar series. Today, we will be talking about voice, the topic very much of the moment. So we have a fantastic panel of industry experts from around the ecosystem, so different perspectives on voice and what it can bring to broadcaster and operators services. Before I introduce you to the panelists and we dive in, just a few housekeeping notes. So the webinar is scheduled for 1 hour, including time for Q&A. All participants will be on mute in listen only. However, you can submit questions via the webinar Q&A panel at any time. We will be providing a recording of the webinar to all registrants once we are finished, so you will have that to yourselves. So without further ado, let's move on and meet our speakers. So I'll start. I'm moderating today's session. I'm Luke Gaden. I'm Head of Strategy and Solutions at Exceedo. We build OTT services for the broadcast and operator space, and as such, voice is very, very much of interest to us right now. Tyler.
Hi there, I'm Tyler Bell. I run voice initiatives on the product side for Roku.
Ben.
Hi there, yeah, as Luke mentioned, I'm Ben Creasy. I work for Channel 4 and more specifically All4, which is Channel 4's video on demand platform. I look after the big screen platforms, but also new emerging platforms, including voice.
Great, thanks, Ben. And finally, Vitaly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vitaly Soroka. I head up creative services in Exceedo North America, where we do a lot of custom application work, but as well as product work, and obviously, because we're here, a lot of innovation as well.
Great, thanks everyone. So let's dive in. Tyler, if I can start with you. Again, voice very much a topic of the moment. I think there's forecast that 50% of US broadband-enabled households will be using speaker assistants with voice services by 2022. As broadcasters and operators look at integrating voice into their services, can you speak to the value that you think voice brings to those services, and also maybe speak to how broadcasters and operators should be thinking perhaps of measuring that value?
Sure. The way I look at voice is it's very much of a force multiplier for the consumer experience. And what I mean by that is that it's an accelerant, it's a convenience, it's not a replacement, but it helps consumers get to video content faster and easier. So it helps with discovery, it helps with playback, and it helps with interaction. And generally the model, the way I tend to think about this is that in the same way that mobile phones meant that basically so many additional devices and interfaces could be created because the mobile phone became the interface for those devices, voice is very much the same way. It doesn't replace it, but it does allow for additional conveniences on top of that 10-foot display. And so really what the way Roku tends to think about this is we prioritize voice interactions where typing on an on-screen keyboard is onerous or troublesome. So anything that allows consumers to find what they're looking for and get it playing as quickly as possible really is at the top of our voice priority list. And generally in how one measures this and how one measures the success and impact of voice, it's easy to look at voice only specifics, but again, as we tend to look at this as a complementary interface on top of what Roku already does, really ultimately it comes down to engagement. We look at how does voice impact streaming hours, how does the use of natural language engage the number of searches, and really are people watching more content on Roku when they use voice compared to when they do not.
That's great, Tyler. Thank you. And so, just on that last point, have you seen from the from your perspective at Roku, have you seen greater engagement or increased engagement from end users as a result of enabling voice? Is that something that?
Yeah, it's still early days at Roku, so I'm not in a position to give you sort of unequivocal metrics on engagement right now. I have seen industry metrics that suggest between sort of 15 to 20 times the number of searches are made when voice is there, just because typing on that on-screen keyboard is so onerous. So when consumers know that they can navigate by voice and they can pause and play by voice or power on their device and search by voice, you see a lot of those increased commands coming in. So the number of voice commands is rising significantly. The number of searches is certainly rising significantly across the sector. I think we're still early days in the world of voice, and I'm watching the Roku numbers very carefully.
Great, thanks, Tyler. So, Vitaly, if I could move on to you now. You've written some materials recently, I think blog posts or a white paper, where you've drawn some interesting conclusions or come to some interesting thoughts around how voice can be used to enhance TV viewing. Obviously, Tyler spoke to this point, particularly around obviously making searches easier, but could you speak to some of the insights that you mentioned? Maybe give us some examples of that enhanced TV viewing experience using voice.
Yes, definitely. So based on our research and our experience so far with voice, and we've done a few different demos internally and externally. Based on that, we came up with we kind of narrowed it down to 3 different scenarios. So first one is fairly basic and kind of relates to what Tyler said. It's search. It's also hands-free operations. Like when you want to put down your remote, or you lost your remote, or you just too lazy to reach for it. You do want to be able to play, pause, switch videos or other different type of content on the screen, basically anything that you would be able to do with the remote control. Another more advanced scenario is where you would be able to do something a little bit more challenging or complicated in a way in UX aspect of it. Think of like a live game, and you just want to pull up stats for player 1 versus player 2. Something like that would be fairly easy to do with voice. It's even delightful. I would say it relates to a gamification of the whole experience. But then when you think how it's done with the remote control, it's fairly challenging. You would have to possibly navigate away from your experience, and having to go to the menu structure and navigate it that way, find the team and the player and pin perhaps, or and do it multiple times to compare different sets of stats for different players or teams. Like I said, something like that would be fairly easy with using voice, and we definitely see a lot of potential in that, where especially in the TV experience, where it's fairly common to condense the amount of information that goes on the screen or is available to users, just because it's a known fact, obviously, that it's a lot more challenging to navigate through through data structure using the remote control than, say, the touch device or even a mouse with your laptop. So it's quite common and expected to, like I said, to condense amount of information, to limit it to less functionality. But here in this scenario, from what I described so far, you can see that basically you can have access to any information, any content that you have available through the backend without hesitating, how difficult or how challenging it will be, and will your users follow through, or they will be frustrated and drop off halfway. That's sort of a natural ability with voice. I think it does have a lot of potential in this area. We are born with the natural ability to learn how to speak, and we do it freely every day, multiple times a day. Some of us, do it for a very long time, and none of us are born with the ability to, operate like a remote control. So that's sort of a human aspect of it. I think does bring a lot of benefit. And the last scenario is creating a dialogue between your brand, if you will, your service, your content, your system, and your audience and your user. And I think it's definitely a huge benefit to our customers that we see. Brings a lot of value where you can engage in a more human-like way, where you can speak to the system and the system speaks back in a human voice. So you put that sort of a human touch to it. You can, again, be completely random and agile in your requests. You can ask pretty much anything. It doesn't mean that the system will always have the right answer, but even when it doesn't, you can fail gracefully and have like a suggestion, or just say, I don't have that information. That is definitely less challenging and less effort on the user part than clicking through catalogs and having to choose through perhaps dozens of different choices. And when you talk about polls, or you talk about feedback, or you talk about even onboarding in a TV app, all of that can be quite challenging. But when you bring the voice part in it, that becomes a lot more, I would say, delightful. People are more willing to engage. That's what we've seen so far in our research. And yeah, definitely creates a better experience overall.
So if I can just pick up on one of your earlier points, Vitaly. So the relationship between the remote control as it now exists and voice, do you see voice effectively replacing the remote control, or do you believe that there will always be certain commands or functions that are better suited? I'm kind of interested to understand how you see the sort of the relationship between the two kind of developing.
Yeah, it's a good question. Let's look at the remote control as an input device so far. We have all seen it go through different stages, and we all remember. And I still have my smart TV remote with millions of buttons. Some of them I don't even know what they do. And when we look at systems that are a little bit more advanced and modern, you actually see that amount of buttons decrease drastically. Basically, the way we design our TV experiences, we always count on pretty much 6 buttons, which is a D-pad, 4 directional buttons, OK, and a back button. So that's all you need with the new generation of experiences. So if the remote control itself is becoming smaller, becoming more simpler to operate, I would think it would be fair to say that voice will affect it in a big way. I would not go as far as saying that it will remove remote controls completely, but it will give a lot more opportunity for users to operate hands-free if they wish to. But right now, I would say we are focusing on a hybrid approach where you can still interact with the experience using the remote control, and perhaps some users will not be willing or be able to engage with voice, and then voice as an experience goes as a layer on top. So the moment you pick up your remote, you click on a button, you're back to the to the standard sort of experience. And then once you engage with the voice, another layer comes on top, and you can go to different sections, or perhaps start the video, pause the video, and bring up some kind of a search results using voice. So I think that hybrid approach works really well so far, anyways, and you can see it in other industries. It's when there is a big generational shift, like for example, automotive industry. Everything was gas powered and diesel, and then you can see that 5-10 years ago there was another wave of hybrid vehicles, and now it's fully electric. If somebody came out with fully electric vehicle 10 years ago, it probably would be challenging to sell that as a concept. Right now, people are a little bit more open because they're a little bit, they're a bit more comfortable with the whole concept. So I think same thing will be happening here. Like I said, not sure if it will replace completely, but it will definitely, I would say it will take lead in many ways.
Great, thank you. So Ben, with that perspective from Tyler around how Roku's looking at the value of voice as a force multiplier and accelerant, and then perhaps with some of the thoughts from Vitaly on how voice can enhance TV viewing, could you speak to sort of how much of it all, any of that played into Channel 4's decision to integrate Google Home, which I believe you did earlier this year, and maybe also speak to what you've learnt from that process and perhaps how it has informed your kind of future thinking, and maybe whether you found things to be different once you'd launched.
Yeah, so I think I agree with both Vitaly and Tyler's comments there. The reason that we decided to implement the Google Home is that we wanted to learn how we could deliver a great voice user experience, so we can be ahead of the game, or at least up with the game when it inevitably hits kind of mass market, and it is the way that most users will interact with video, at least in some form, maybe not the end-to-end journey, but the kind of the search journey. So we'd workshopped quite a lot of ideas to do with voice and video playback of content, and we quickly realized that it was really, really powerful, or could be really powerful, in getting users to play back quicker than any other method, kind of harking back to what Tyler was saying earlier. But we found that kind of most implementations could be unwieldy and unhelpful, especially kind of the end-to-end voice journeys. When I say that I mean a journey that doesn't involve a remote control at all. So they involved kind of long utterances and kind of maybe slightly clunky journeys using actions and skills. So when Google approached us with kind of their implementation, which was, we felt that this was really kind of the best possible core journey that we could implement to learn from. And if we were going to do anything with the voice that created the best experience, and harking back to the kind of that wow factor, and kind of the delighters, we really felt that Google had the best end-to-end journey. And that's not to say that we thought that it was the biggest in the market, but we just thought that we would learn the most about a good end-to-end voice journey from doing this work. What it also did would it gave us some opportunity to build some strategic infrastructure that we could reuse for other voice implementations, and other catalog integrations, so we could really be ready to kind of go at the voice market when it becomes a real driver of views. And I suppose what we learned throughout the journey, and what I kind of found surprising, was potentially not what we learned when we'd released it. And we were seeing the numbers coming in from users, although that is really interesting and something that we are looking into. But it was also how to tackle all the design issues and the UX issues when in kind of a zero UI environment. For example, how do you implement parental control when you can't type a PIN? How do you accept guidance, age ratings, when you don't have a remote control to press? how do we know what episode to play to the user when they've just said the show? Do we play the first episode? Do we play the last, where they left off? So it gave a really, really good opportunity for us to learn about the way that we should build for voice, and then going forward gave us a real opportunity to pivot quickly and move with the market.
So Ben, just really interesting insight. Thank you. I'm curious, the development work that you did, which you are planning to reuse for other voice voice integrations as and when. Are you able to sort of give a sense of how much kind of additional effort or complexity that involved? It sounds like much the smartest way of doing it, but just interested to understand whether that was a sort of a considerable additional effort, or whether that was something that you were able to do more efficiently, if you will.
Yeah, it was more effort to go with a more strategic approach. We'd often kind of dipped into some of the infrastructure that we needed in projects before, catalog deliveries to other platforms, but we decided that we were being approached by all the platforms and manufacturers about some type of catalog integration or voice search, or and we thought that it would be stupid not to build the extra infrastructure and be able to use that over and over again. So yeah, it did cost us a bit more, but I think we'll really reap the benefits in the future.
Great, thank you. So Tyler, if I can come back to you again. So one of the sort of examples I think that Vitaly mentioned a little bit earlier was this ability to kind of create dialogue between viewers and voice-enabled services. Are you able to speak to any trends that you are seeing in terms of how users are interacting right now, and perhaps also, do you have expectations or forecasts around the way that those trends might develop or change as we kind of move further towards the voice-enabled world?
Yeah, I think we're at a very interesting nexus in voice development and voice UX and media. So specifically, the way that the industry and the way that consumers were introduced to voice interfaces was through headless devices. So-called smart speakers that don't have a screen, like an Amazon Echo or a Google Home. So sort of the earliest incarnation of these consumer-friendly in-home devices didn't have a screen at all. The general trend that you see now is that certainly the Googles and the Amazons of the world are adding screens onto these devices. They're starting small, and then they're kind of working their way up. And really, that's an acknowledgement that there are significant limitations to a voice-only interface. Roku starts on the opposite end of the spectrum. So our greatest asset are those wonderful, massive television screens that every Roku consumer has in front of them. And so we're looking to identify the best possible way to engage users and allow them to use natural language in conversational interfaces, not by having devices necessarily speak back to you when they don't need to, but really, what is the role that the visual side plays in this? And I mention that because I want to say that it's so early that this is a very, very new juncture where people are looking at the development of a so-called multimodal interface. So an interface where you're using basically three mechanisms to interact. You're using the remote control, which we're all familiar with. You're using your voice, and you're also using your eyes to see what's on the screen. And so in one way, you can imagine that you speak to a speaker or a microphone rather, and the device, the television, speaks back to you. You can control it entirely by your remote control, or you can imagine a world where you ask the device something and then the device shows you things back. And so the conversation is spoken, but also visual. In reality, all of those three use cases are not exclusive, and consumers will use voice when it's most convenient, and they will use the remote control when it's most convenient. And there are many things, many types of information that are better shown than spoken aloud. And so the reason I'm going into this detail is really to note that the trends that we're seeing, I think it's fairly easy to point at general trends in voice and the kind of control and precision that you can get, and increases in precision and recall and the advancement of the voice UX. But I'm pushing slightly counter to that and saying that, you know, Roku's looking at how voice can be used in a conversational way with this in a multimodal environment, and we're looking very carefully because this is brand new. And it's, you know, I think I'll probably have more to say this time next year. But I do want to recognize that this idea of the voice and the screen working together is really hot off the press. This is a fresh loaf straight out of the oven, and we're all trying to figure out how best to accommodate it and how best to make it work for the consumer. And it's very exciting times.
So, Tyler, that's just on that question of the sort of multimodal environment you spoke of. That for somebody who is not as technically gifted as you, i.e., me, sounds quite daunting. You know, as you're looking at sort of the engineering work, kind of what are the key challenges that are facing you as you attempt to move towards that space?
I'll give you two examples, which I would hope would serve as sort of the greater list of issues that we're wrestling with. The first is you can think of this as sort of technical or maybe a contextual issue, which is really to have a proper conversational interface for a multimedia device. The voice interface should always know what's available on the screen. And so when users say, you know, if you've got sort of Star Wars episodes 1 through 4, you can say play episode 4. The voice interface knows what's on the screen. It knows what you're looking at, and it can make intelligent assumptions, if not intuitions, based upon the context that the user's looking at. And really, that's a challenge, right? That's a natural outcome. That's where we all want to get to. But informing the voice experience with contextual relevance of what's visually being presented is still very new in the sector. So how do you do that? How do you ensure that your operating system and your platform is talking, you know, correctly to the voice stack, and that when users make an utterance, that entities that are on the screen are prioritized as it determines what the user is requesting. And those are all, we have those tools in front of us. They're lying on the workbench. We just haven't built the vehicle yet. So that's one of the most significant issues, and I think that's going to be an interesting and fascinating nut to crack. The second issue is more sort of at the business level, is that unless you own monolithically the platform that you're working with, that is to say that you own the content, you own the operating system, and you own the interface, you as a platform or an operator are going to have to engage with your partners who provide the content. And so Roku takes a platform-centric view of voice, and we want to ensure that every voice application doesn't behave differently. So really our goal is to ensure that users can have a consistent and uniform voice experience whenever they're using a Roku device, whether an app is active or whether the Roku homepage is active. We want users to know that they can ask a certain question or issue a certain command, and the platform will always behave consistently. And we need to do that with our partners' cooperation. This isn't a top-down thing. So we have to get the people who produce content, which is surfaced through Roku, we need to engage them, articulate the value of voice, and ask them to make certain changes to their application to better accommodate these voice requests. And that takes time. But the biggest issue there is demonstrating value for our partners. We don't just want to come with a list and say, you have to do this. We want to come with a list of things to say, look, we'd really like you to do this, because if you do, then the following things will happen. And at the top of that list should be increased engagement and better visibility on the content that you have as a provider.
So I would assume that 100% of content providers would want better visibility and more engagement. Those are fantastic metrics for people who distribute content. I would also guess that not everybody is going at the same pace in terms of making those changes. So how well is that dialogue going? Are you happy with the pace, and do you feel like you're able to show a compelling argument? Again, the value that you get out of it is exactly what I guess a content owner would be looking for. But how is that dialogue going?
Yeah, there is some chicken and egg here. Ideally, you want to have the data to suggest that this interface or this mechanism of voice engagement is really the best way forward. But of course, until you propose that mechanism, and again, we come back to the fact that so much of this is very brand new, you will we don't have the data to demonstrate it. So we make our arguments about the uniformity and UX behaviors based on good practice, based on many years working with UX and working with voice, and then we acknowledge the fact that we might need to change things as well as we learn more about the users. But there is I think what you will see, and there's always this tension in any kind of relationship like this, is that content providers take a very content-centric view of voice, and platform providers take a platform-centric view. And if I were to sort of abstract that down, I'd say that sort of the platform providers take a horizontal approach, where perhaps you can do fewer things with voice, but they are uniform and consistent and universally applied. Whereas you might have someone creates an application provider might be deep and vertical, and they might use an Alexa skill or Google action to create a highly customized, detailed interaction with their specific content, with their specific channel or their app. And this isn't to say that these approaches are mutually exclusive. It's not to say that one is better than the other, but rather it's to acknowledge the fact that there are two different ways of viewing this world. And I think one of the most interesting and engaging challenges is ensuring that those are well balanced.
If I can actually just go back to the point you were making earlier about the sort of multimodal world that we're moving towards, and it kind of occurred to me as you were talking about the transition from kind of visual to spoken and back again. Do wearables, and I'm particularly thinking about the glass type of wearable, do these kind of feature into do these feature in that thinking? Are they part of your considerations?
I think any multimodal interface would feature in this kind of thing, and that if users are issuing voice commands, then you have to understand the genuine consumer experience, and it's not just what they're saying, it's what they're seeing. So whenever a visual interface is involved, you really have to consider it. Roku's primary concern is not wearables or other devices. It's really that the beautiful high definition 10-foot experience that all of our consumers have in common. That's the audience that we're looking to enrich as our priority.
Gotcha. So Vitali, if I can move on to you. So we've talked a little bit now about this notion of creating dialogue with your viewer using voice. Are there any kind of quick wins that are out there for broadcasters and for operators as they're kind of considering integrating these capabilities?
Yeah, I would say that looking at the out-of-the-box solutions from Google and Amazon, uh, without having to customize it too much, I think is a bit easier than creating a fully custom scale, for example, for Alexa or Action for Google Home that have a lot more functionality and kind of maps your application in a lot more detail. So like an example would be, less scope, but do on board on one of these platforms or something else. And less scope, I mean, things like controlling your video, which means play and pause, things like autoplaying things are like search, for example, very important. So just focusing on those few things and really starting to plan ahead, even if you implement it on some level, on some limited level now, which would be one of the quick wins. Plan ahead in a way that your data, your backend is structured in a way that is voice friendly, that can be integrated with more functionality down the road, with perhaps more platforms or a little bit deeper with one of the platforms. I think those things are important, and they're very, I would say it's necessary at this point. We do see voice as something that's gonna stick. It definitely has a huge potential, and it will be around for a while. And I would say the functionality that comes with it will definitely evolve and will become something else. And we all see this kind of a happening right now, where it's moving from audio only to audio plus visual. And next thing you know, your audience will see things that are not voice enabled as broken. It will be a broken experience to them, and though they will be fine managing with whatever remote control comes with it or doing some kind of a manual control, having voice accessibility is going to be very important. So like I said, smaller scope, but do get on board with one of the platforms. And there is a lot of help from manufacturers as well. They are willing to help anyone who is ready to come on board with their expertise, their knowledge, and any type of different help that they have to get as many content providers as possible on board. Definitely, there is a good competition. All of it changed quite recently with Google Home doing quite well. Before that, it was basically Alexa taking up like 3/4 of the market, and now it's basically head to head, almost 50-50 there. But and like I said, planning your content strategy, planning your backend properly, definitely having voice as part of your experience design plan for the future, for the next generation of your applications. Those things would probably be the easiest to do right now. I'm not saying it's easy, but would definitely be one of the first things I would consider to do.
So that last point sounds like a similar philosophy to the one that Ben and Channel 4 took in terms of how they built out their first voice implementation. So just could you speak a little bit to, and I'm again imagining that this is somewhat similar to the point that Tyler made about asking content providers to change or to amend a few things at their end. Could you speak a little bit to this question of metadata structure and to some of the complexities there? Because from my time working at a broadcaster, I know that managing a significant catalog of video assets and keeping the metadata up to date and in good form, and then amending it, as in one fell swoop is not a straightforward task. So, how can you quantify maybe how complicated or how difficult getting the right metadata structure is? Is it something that should be attempted all at once? Can you take a phased approach to it?
Yeah, I think phased approach works in most of the cases. I mean, it all depends on the amount of investment anybody is willing to make into this type of integration, this type of a content. I would say integrating content into anything, voice or anything else in the future, that will depend on the metadata. Metadata structure and how well it is maintained. I wouldn't say it's just for voice. It's also for your search capabilities. If you have an app, if you have some kind of a service and your search is not up to snuff, then you're probably missing out on quite a bit of traffic. Search as a concept, voice or otherwise, is definitely used more often now than it was before, and a lot of times that's how users find their way in ever increasing library of content. So having that figured out, having that maintained properly, having that work, like I said, voice or otherwise, on even your existing applications is very, very important. Is there additional effort that needs to be that requires? Yes, probably. Will the payoff be enough? I would say more than enough. We do see on our end that any service with great search, or any service where there is an easier way to access content, does have quite a dramatic increase in engagement. And also consider that the type of content, it's something that relates to one of the comments I made in the beginning, the type of content that was always sort of like it was a core content for 10-foot experience. It will change with technologies like voice, which means that you will have access to more information, more detailed information. And if you make it easy for users to make fairly potentially challenging requests using voice, something that was too hard to do using remote control, they will do that. They will go ahead and do that, and they will have very specific requests. Which they will go way beyond saying, I want, this season and that episode. It will be very specific, and it will be, I would say your audience will expect very immediate results. So having that content and metadata in place and maintained properly, I think it's going to be crucial, especially when you talk about recommendations and suggestions, and everybody's talking about artificial intelligence. All of that will have to come together as a piece of puzzle to make this service of the future, and will provide better content, better accessibility for your users, and in return you will see increased engagements. Yeah, I would say it definitely is worth the investment, time and otherwise, to have a very robust system that can react to these technologies such as voice and something else in the future.
Great, thank you, Vitaly. So, Ben, I think we've heard from everyone here today that integrating voice into your service requires, it's quite a multifaceted beast, as it were. And so it touches on a lot of parts of an organization like Channel 4's stack. So when you're looking at voice within the context of the overall All4 roadmap, does it sit out on its own? Is it part of a theme? How do you think about it, and how do you plan for it?
Yeah, so to start with, when we first started thinking about voice and what we could do with it, and realized that we wanted to do the Google Home and strategic infrastructure build, that came out of a separate budget that wasn't funded by our own roadmap. And as kind of Tyler mentioned, I think voice is kind of chicken and egg. We're trying to work out if it's going to be a thing. You got to wait for, and we didn't want to wait for it for everyone else to do it before we did. So we ran this as an innovation project, really. As I said, to learn, which was good, and it was good that we could get buy-in from other parts of the business, because it would have been really tough to get into the roadmap if you're trying to look at it in volume of views or pushing the needle in the current state of the market. But since we managed to get Google Home in and live, we do now consider voice as part of our what we call our Access and Connect theme. That I currently lead on, that focuses on ways to access the app, including any ways to deep link into the app, as well as first run and kind of onboarding experiences. As part of that work stream, and that particular theme's roadmap, we've also integrated Alexa voice search on Amazon Fire TV. Which we saw as probably the largest scale non-end-to-end kind of voice search project in terms of driving views. So as part of that roadmap, we are putting things to the top, and we are working on things. We do have many more features and platform integrations and additional features to Google Home, as well as more innovative and proprietary functionality that personally I would really love to work on. But it is tough within all of the other things that we're looking at. As always with a roadmap, you need to really be able to prove or be sure that the usership and the KPIs are really going to be pushed. So it is quite hard to get the next thing in voice into the roadmap. It will get easier and easier as the market gets bigger. It will be easier and easier the more we learn about what voice is good at, and how much we can learn about how to deliver a great voice experience with currently what we have. So I think we're in a really good place in order to with the knowledge that we need and the infrastructure that we have to kind of when we can detect and we see that there's a real drive in the market for voice functionality, that we can pivot really quickly and get those things that we have in our roadmap to the top of the backlog and get them worked on.
So a couple of kind of follow-up questions there, I guess. Did you have the relevant skill sets internally at Channel 4 for the Google Home piece, but B, actually more interestingly perhaps, as you're looking at that roadmap and incorporating hopefully more voice pieces there, is that something that you feel can be accommodated within either the internal team or with the partners that you work with?
Yeah, it's a tricky one at the moment because it is all quite new. There is a lot of learning from everyone in the team, and we had no real experience of voice platforms or anyone within our team. So it was a lot of learning along the way, and we feel that we are the team that does work on the voice the voice project is now really kind of up to speed and skilled, as I think they need to be. It'd be really interesting in the future to that if this was a main focus of our roadmap, whether it would influence our recruitment process or our the teams that we build, and whether we would hire or skill up through voice for voice skills, currently we haven't done, but I think that increasingly we'll need to, and increasingly there'll be that skill set that we will be able to hopefully lean on or recruit into as and when we need it.
So I'm minded that I keep sort of switching back to a point that somebody made earlier, but one more time, just again on this on the metadata question. Channel 4 obviously has a huge catalogue of series of programs. Is that still work ongoing to kind of make sure that all of that is up to scratch, or do you feel again with the infrastructure work that you've done that you've got that kind of nailed?
Definitely not nailed, but I think the strategic work definitely did help. We found out what we didn't have that we could have, and there is other projects within the business to enrich metadata or make sure that we have the right metadata that we can deliver to not only voice, as I kind of mentioned before. This is outside of voice. It's kind of more just catalog deliveries to different platforms. Whether we have the right API available to API endpoints available to platforms. So it does feel like a bit of a work in progress. I think we did a really good job at using what we already have, but I think that in the future, hopefully we've got a really good first step into that kind of proliferation of metadata across all the platforms and within our own platform as well.
Great, thank you, Ben. So the final question, which is the dreaded sort of summary question, I suppose, to all the panelists is, voice has been described as a paradigm shift in the way that we interact with technology. Is that reasonable? Is that overblown? Is it too early? Tyler?
Yeah, I think it's overblown and too early, not to put too fine a point on it. What we're seeing is I mean, any kind of new interfaces get all the hype and they get all the buzz. There are some wonderful things you can do with it that you can't do through other mechanisms. And really, I see voice as a facilitator. You know, my view of its role in a multimodal interface, the role of conversation, the role of visual elements and cues really just means that this is another rich ingredient into the consumer user experience, and not necessarily a revolutionary one. I don't want to undersell it either, but you know, I tend to be conservative when viewing the consumer experience, and I look forward to seeing how this rolls out. I think I'll be happy if I'm proved right, and I'll probably be happy if I'm proved wrong as well.
I think I got this point from Forbes magazine, and they do have magazines to sell. Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. It's paradigm shift is probably kind of a bit too strong a phrase for it, but I do think it will shape the way that we interact with machines, and I also think it will change the machines that we interact with. We're obviously seeing all of these different form factors that are coming out. So I do think in that terms, it will change the way that we do interact. But that's not to say that voice will replace everything. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think the voice is really, really bad at doing some things, and always will be. There's kind of an analogy that I like, and it's hard to explain when you don't have the video in front of you. But there's a clip from an Iron Man movie, and Tony Stark is fixing his suit, and it's a hologram in front of him, and he's zooming in and fixing it with his hands. But all the time he's talking to his assistant. I can't remember the name, but that's right. Changing tools, adding color, doing different things. So voice would be a terrible at fixing the things like he was doing with his hands. It just wouldn't work. But if you think of it as more of an assistant, a third hand, and an extra complementary to the other things that a user is doing, then I think that's where voice really kind of comes into its own. So I don't think it'll ever be just voice. I don't think it'll ever be just anything. I think all of these different input methods and ways of interacting with these computers will be complementary of each other.
Thanks, Ben. And finally, Vitaly, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it definitely has the potential to change the way we interact with things. I don't know if it'll render everything else, useless, for example, like remote controls or not. But it'll definitely change the way we experience things, or for example, it doesn't have to be direct impact. It could be indirect impact, the way we experience things. It's not something that you see or hear immediately as a feedback. It could be something that is based on the analytics that comes back from the voice input. The way we speak, it's an emotionally charged request or a question or a comment that can be definitely processed in a different way from remote controls or manual input, because it does give insight into who we are a lot more precisely, because we're all unique. Am I happy? Am I upset? Do I like this movie? And why do I like this movie? Or some piece of content, that will be it will be analyzed very differently if we have access to all the rich emotionally charged analytics that will come back from it. And that, I think, is a great getaway to things like artificial intelligence and platforms that are based on intelligent data. Basically, it gives you intelligent data instead of dumb data that we get oftentimes with manual controls. And I think that's where it's going to make the biggest difference.
Vitaly, thanks very much. So I'm afraid we've completely run out of time. I hope this webinar has been interesting for everyone. I would like to thank our panelists, Tyler Bell, Ben Creasy, and Vitaly Sorokin, very much indeed for their time. Again, a recording will be available to all registrants, and I look forward to welcoming you to our next webinar. Thank you very much.